My family loves him. They'll never accept you. I can't choose you over them, she said. Choosing. I never imagined I'd be writing this story. But here I am, 2 years removed from the worst decision someone else made for both of us. My name is Marcus, and this is about the woman who chose everyone's comfort over our truth. It's about family pressure, about being deemed not good enough, and about what happens when people realize too late what they've thrown away. This isn't a revenge fantasy or a victory lap. It's just what happened when I finally chose myself. Hello friends, before I continue the story, please support the channel by becoming a subscriber and giving the video a like. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching right now. We met during my first year of residency at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. I was grinding through 80-hour weeks, surviving on vending machine coffee and 4 hours of sleep. She was Vanessa, a corporate attorney at her father's firm, polished and precise in ways I'd never encountered. We literally collided outside a Starbucks near Michigan Avenue. I was half asleep, she was rushing to a deposition, and our coffee cups went everywhere. She laughed instead of getting angry, and something about that moment felt like fate. Our first few months were electric in that way early relationships can be. I'd finish brutal shifts and find her waiting in my apartment with takeout, ready to hear about my day. She'd talk about cases, about the pressure of living up to her father's legacy, and I'd listen like every word mattered. We'd take walks along the lakefront at midnight when I had rare free evenings, talking about everything and nothing. She made residency bearable, made Chicago feel less lonely for a kid from Detroit who'd worked his whole life to wear that white coat. I fell completely, the kind of love where you start building futures in your head without realizing it. But even in those golden early days, there were shadows I chose to ignore. The first time she mentioned me to her family, her mother's response was, "A doctor, that's wonderful. Where did he do his undergraduate?" When Vanessa said Wayne State, the silence apparently stretched long enough to hurt. Her father asked what kind of medicine. When she said I was pursuing emergency medicine, he'd remarked it was respectable, though not quite the prestige of cardiology or neurosurgery. These comments came back to me secondhand, Vanessa laughing them off as her parents being old-fashioned about credentials. I laughed too, but something settled uncomfortably in my chest. The first family dinner happened 6 months in, at their home in Kenilworth. The house wasn't just big, it was generational wealth made architectural, the kind of place with a name instead of an address. I showed up in my best suit, the one I'd bought for medical school interviews, carrying wine I'd researched for an hour. Vanessa's mother, Patricia, greeted me with a smile that never reached her eyes, the kind white people perfect when they're being polite instead of welcoming. Her father, Robert, shook my hand with the grip of someone assessing whether you're worth his time. Dinner was an endurance test disguised as hospitality. They asked about my background with the kind of curiosity that's really investigation, where I grew up, what my parents did, how I managed to get into medical school. I explained my father was a union electrician, my mother a postal worker, both still in Detroit working the same jobs they'd had for 30 years. I talked about community college before transferring to Wayne State, about the scholarship that made medical school possible, about the mountain of debt I was still climbing. Patricia nodded with what I'd learned to recognize as her "how unfortunate" expression, the one she probably used at charity galas. Then there was Cameron. He wasn't at that first dinner, but his presence filled the room anyway. Photos on the mantle, stories dropped casually into conversation. Cameron Bradford, the son of the family's oldest friends, practically raised alongside Vanessa at their country club. He'd gone to Princeton, then Harvard Law, now working at some white shoe firm in New York. "Such a shame he couldn't make it tonight," Patricia said, her eyes sliding to me with meaning I pretended not to catch. Vanessa squeezed my hand under the table, her jaw tight, and I told myself it didn't matter. I should have paid more attention to how that evening ended. Robert pulled Vanessa aside while Patricia walked me to the door, her smile still perfectly false. "Marcus, you seem like a lovely young man, very determined," she said, her tone suggesting those were consolation prizes. "I'm sure residency keeps you terribly busy. Such a demanding path." There was something in how she said it, like she was already calculating my inadequacies, already measuring me against someone else. I drove back to the city with Vanessa quiet beside me, And when I asked if it went okay, she said, "You were perfect. They'll come around." The fact that they needed to come around should have been my first real warning. Life continued, and I convinced myself things were fine. Residency consumed me. Emergency medicine doesn't allow for much outside processing when you're managing traumas, overdoses, heart attacks, and everything else humanity throws at a hospital. Vanessa and I settled into a rhythm where I'd crash at her place in Lincoln Park when I wasn't on call, grateful for her bigger apartment and actual furniture. She never complained about my schedule, never made me feel guilty for the canceled plans or the times I fell asleep mid-conversation. I thought that meant she understood, that she was in it for real. But the family pressure never actually stopped, it just went underground. Vanessa would come back from family events I was too busy to attend, and she'd be distant in ways that took hours to thaw. She'd mention Cameron had been there, how he'd asked about her, how everyone thought it was so nice. They were reconnecting. "My parents love asking about him," she'd say. Frustration in her voice, but something else too. Something I didn't want to name. I'd pull her close and kiss her forehead and promise that once residency lightened up, I'd make more events. She'd nod against my chest, but the tension never fully dissolved. The comparisons started subtle, barely noticeable at first. Cameron's firm just made him junior partner. Can you believe it at 29? Or my dad was saying how Cameron's handled some really high-profile cases. I'd listen and nod, not feeling threatened because I was too exhausted to feel much of anything beyond the basic human emotions. But they accumulated, these little mentions, these casual observations about his success, his compatibility with her world, his ease with her family. Looking back, I can see how they were building something in her mind, brick by brick, the idea that maybe there was an easier path than the one we were walking. Then came the holidays, year 2 of our relationship. I managed to get Christmas Eve off through a trade that cost me New Year's, and Vanessa was thrilled I could finally come to the family gathering. It was the whole extended clan, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, at the Kenilworth house decorated like something from a magazine. I walked in wearing another carefully chosen outfit, carrying expensive bourbon for her father, flowers for her mother, ready to prove I belonged. The evening started civil enough, polite questions about my work, generic small talk about the weather and the Bears' disappointing season. Cameron was there. Of course he was, family friend, practically family himself, as Patricia kept mentioning. He was everything I expected. Tall, polished, easy in his expensive sweater and that casual confidence old money provides. He shook my hand firmly, called me the famous Marcus, and inserted himself into conversations with the kind of charm that feels like aggression wearing a smile. He and Vanessa had history you could see in how they talked, shorthand references to shared memories, inside jokes from childhood summers in Martha's Vineyard. I stood there, smiled, and felt every mile between Detroit and Kenilworth. The moment that still burns happened before dinner. I was in the kitchen helping Vanessa's aunt with drinks when I overheard Robert and Patricia in the adjacent study. He's a nice enough young man, but really Vanessa could do so much better, Patricia was saying, her voice carrying that aristocratic clip. Robert's response was quieter but clear. Cameron's here, available and appropriate. We should encourage that proximity. My hands froze on the wine bottle, something cold spreading through my chest. Vanessa's aunt had heard too, her face flushing with embarrassment as our eyes met. Neither of us acknowledged it, but it was out there now, undeniable. I made it through dinner, through the gift exchange, through the after-dinner drinks where Cameron positioned himself next to Vanessa on the couch. I smiled and nodded and played the part of the gracious guest, even as I felt like an exhibit at a museum, interesting perhaps, but ultimately not belonging. The drive back to the city was silent until Vanessa finally said, "I'm sorry about Cameron. My parents invited him without telling me." I wanted to ask if that was true, if she really had no idea, but I was too tired to fight. "It's fine," I lied, and we let it drop like we'd been letting things drop for months. Things shifted after that night, a crack in the foundation widening into something structural. Vanessa became preoccupied, distracted in ways that went beyond normal stress. She'd stare at her phone with expressions I couldn't read, take calls in another room, mention family obligations that came up suddenly and frequently. When I asked if everything was okay, She'd snap that she was fine, then apologize and blame work. But I'd been with enough patience to recognize avoidance, to sense when someone was preparing to deliver bad news. I just didn't want to believe our relationship had become something she needed to escape. The ending came on a Tuesday in March, during one of those gray Chicago afternoons where even the sky seems resigned. I'd worked a rare 9-to-5 shift and came home to find Vanessa in my apartment. Our apartment, really, since she'd moved in 6 months earlier. She was sitting on the couch, still in her work clothes, hands folded in her lap like she was at a deposition. 2 suitcases stood by the door, and my stomach dropped before she said a word. "We need to talk," she began. And I knew from her lawyer voice this wasn't a conversation but a closing argument. I sat down across from her, not beside her, instinctively maintaining distance. "What's going on, Vanessa?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline starting to spike. She took a breath, and when she looked at me, there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not quite pity, not quite regret, but something resigned and final. "Marcus, you know I care about you deeply. These 2 years have been wonderful in many ways," she started, and the past tense landed like a punch. "But I've been doing a lot of thinking about our future, about what's realistic long-term, and I don't think we can make this work." The words came out rehearsed, like she'd practiced in front of a mirror. She talked about compatibility, about life goals, about the realities of our different backgrounds. She mentioned my schedule, the demands of my career, how she needed someone more present, more established, more able to engage with her world. Every point was lawyered perfectly, framed to make it sound rational, inevitable, maybe even mutual. But I sat there listening to the subtext, hearing what she wasn't saying directly. "You're not enough. You don't fit. My family will never truly accept you, and I'm not strong enough to fight them on it." "Is this about Cameron?" I finally asked, my voice harder than I intended. She flinched, a tell she couldn't suppress. "This is about us, about what's not working," she deflected, but her eyes slid away. I laughed, a bitter sound. "Vanessa, just be honest. Your family's been pushing him since day one. Are you leaving me for him? Or are you leaving me because they'll never approve of who I am?" The question hung between us, and for a moment I thought she might actually give me the truth. Instead, she stood up, smoothing her skirt, retreating into composure. "My family loves him," she said finally, and there it was. They've known his family for decades. He fits into that world in ways that are just easier. "My parents will never accept you, Marcus, not really. I've tried to make them see what I see. But they're traditional, they have expectations, and fighting them on this is exhausting." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried an edge of something cruel. "I can't choose you over them. They're my family. I can't spend the rest of my life mediating between you and them, always defending, always explaining. It's not fair to any of us. I deserve peace." Peace. The word echoed in my head. Our relationship had become warfare to her, and she was choosing armistice through surrender. I stood up, feeling something inside me go cold and distant. "So that's it? 2 years, and you're just done because it's hard? Because I don't come from the right zip code or have the right pedigree?" My voice was rising, all the times I'd swallowed their condescension, all the microaggressions and barely veiled judgments finally bubbling up. "I loved you, Vanessa. I rearranged my entire life to make room for you. For us. And you're throwing that away for what? Your parents' approval? Cameron's Princeton degree?" She had the audacity to look hurt, like I was being unfair. "Don't make me the villain here. You know how demanding your career is. You're never available, always at the hospital, always exhausted. Cameron has balance, flexibility. He can actually be present for family events, for the life I want." The hypocrisy was staggering. My career was noble when we met, attractive even, but now it was a liability. And yes, my family adores him. Dinner isn't a minefield when he's there. My mother doesn't ask invasive questions about his student loans or imply he's only with me for social advancement. It's just easier, Marcus. Why is it wrong to want things to be easier? Easier. There it was again. I looked at this woman I'd loved, really looked at her, and saw clearly for the first time. She wasn't a partner willing to build something together against external pressure. She was someone who'd been performing a version of rebellion, and now the performance was too exhausting to maintain. "You're right," I said quietly, watching her expression shift to confusion. "You deserve easy. You deserve someone your family approves of, someone who makes their lives comfortable. That's not me, and it never will be, because I'm not the problem here. They are, and so are you for letting them run your life." Her face flushed with anger, the composure cracking. "How dare you judge my relationship with my family? You don't understand what it's like. The obligations, the expectations." I cut her off. "You're right. I don't understand choosing other people's prejudices over someone who loves you. I don't understand being so afraid of disappointing mommy and daddy that you'd trash something real." I walked to the door, opened it, gestured to her suitcases. "Since you've already packed, I think we're done here. I hope Cameron and your family's approval keep you warm at night." She grabbed her bags, furious tears in her eyes, the kind that come from anger more than sadness. "You're being cruel and reductive. This is more complicated than you're making it." I shook my head. "No, Vanessa, it's actually simple. You had a choice and you made it. You chose their approval over me, over us. Own that instead of dressing it up as compatibility or balance or whatever else helps you sleep at night." She stopped in the doorway, turned back like she wanted to say something else, maybe land one more blow. But I was done, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with my shift. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said, her voice cold and final. "Goodbye, Vanessa," I replied, and closed the door behind her. I stood there in the sudden silence of my apartment, half her things still scattered around, and felt the weight of it all crash down. 2 years erased because I wasn't born into the right circumstances, because my parents chose honest work over country clubs, because I took a different path to the same professional success. The unfairness of it burned in my chest, a heat that threatened to consume everything. That night was one of the longest of my life. I didn't cry, didn't break things, didn't immediately call friends for comfort. I just sat on the couch where we'd spent countless evenings together and let myself feel the full scope of the loss. Not just losing her, but losing the future I'd imagined. The fantasy that love could transcend class and prejudice if you just tried hard enough. It was a death of sorts, the death of my naive belief that being good enough at your work, honorable in your intentions, and genuine in your love would be sufficient. Sometimes other people's limitations determine your worth to them, and there's nothing you can do about it. The days after felt surreal, like moving through water. I went through the motions at the hospital, treating patients, consulting with colleagues, functioning on autopilot while something essential processed in the background. My co-residents noticed. Sarah, one of the few who'd met Vanessa, asked if I was okay over bad cafeteria coffee. "Vanessa and I broke up," I said simply, not elaborating. Sarah knew better than to push, just squeezed my shoulder and said she was sorry. I appreciated the simplicity of it, the lack of demands for explanation or processing. I didn't reach out to Vanessa, didn't text or call or show up at her office demanding closure. What would be the point? She'd made her choice crystal clear, and I had enough self-respect left not to beg someone to choose me when they'd already decisively chosen something else. Instead, I started the practical work of disentanglement. Her name off the lease, her things collected into boxes I'd have shipped to her parents' house. Mutual friends quietly informed without drama or demands they pick sides. It was surgical, the clean removal of someone from your life when the alternative is prolonged infection. The apartment felt haunted for weeks, every corner holding memories I wasn't ready to process. I'd see her coffee mug in the cabinet and feel the loss fresh again. Find one of her hair ties on the bathroom counter and have to sit down as the reality washed over me. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the acute pain started shifting into something else. Not acceptance exactly, but a kind of distant acknowledgement. This had happened. It was unfair. I would survive it. These became the mantras I'd repeat during the 3 a.m. moments when sleep wouldn't come and my mind wouldn't stop replaying our last conversation. Work became my refuge in ways that probably weren't healthy but felt necessary. I picked up extra shifts, volunteered for the rotations no one wanted, stayed late to handle paperwork that could have waited. The emergency department's chaos was clarifying. When you're managing a multi-car accident or talking down a psychiatric patient or coding someone back to life, relationship drama fades into insignificance. My attendings noticed my increased availability, and while they probably suspected personal troubles, they simply took advantage of my willingness. Dr. Chun, my faculty advisor, pulled me aside once to ask if I was okay. "Processing some stuff," I said vaguely, and she nodded, understanding that sometimes work is how we process. But I wasn't just hiding in work. Something else was happening, a slower reckoning with my own role in what had happened. Late nights, I'd replay the relationship, seeing patterns I'd ignored. How often had I accommodated her family's microaggressions to keep the peace? How many times had I made myself smaller, more palatable, less threatening to their worldview? I'd done it thinking it was maturity, thinking I was being the bigger person by not making waves. Now I wondered if I'd simply taught them that disrespecting me had no consequences, that I'd tolerate anything to stay in Vanessa's life. There was a particular memory that haunted me from about 6 months into our relationship. We'd been at some charity gala her firm sponsored, and I'd been introduced to one of her father's partners. The man had looked me up and down and said, "Northwestern's residency program, impressive. Did you do your MD there too?" When I explained Wayne State, his smile had shifted almost imperceptibly. "Well, they do good community medicine work there," he'd said, the implication clear. Not prestigious, not elite, not quite legitimate. Vanessa had been right there, had heard it, and said nothing. I'd laughed it off at the time, but now it felt like a moment I should have addressed, a boundary I should have drawn. How many of those moments had there been? Dozens, probably hundreds, little cuts that I'd allowed because I loved her and wanted to believe love was enough. Her mother's comments about my humble background, delivered with saccharine smiles. Her father's questions about my financial prospects, as if my MD and residency weren't proof enough of future stability. The family friends who'd ask what my parents did with that particular tone, the one that really means, "How did you end up here?" Each time, I'd stayed gracious, stayed calm, stayed determined to prove through sheer decency that I deserved a place at their table. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I'd been auditioning for a role that was never actually available. No amount of politeness or professional success or genuine love for Vanessa could overcome the fundamental fact that I wasn't from their world. Cameron didn't have to prove anything. His last name did it for him, his family connections, his prep school and Ivy League credentials. He was pre-approved by birth, while I was perpetually probationary no matter what I achieved. The unfairness of it still burned, but now I could see how I'd enabled it by pretending it didn't matter. 3 months after the breakup, I made a decision. I was sitting in my apartment on a rare day off, staring at the walls I hadn't bothered to decorate, feeling the weight of stagnation. I could continue like this, working, existing, slowly calcifying around the hurt, or I could actively choose something different. I grabbed my laptop and started researching. By evening, I'd applied for a competitive fellowship in wilderness medicine, a program based in Colorado that combined emergency medicine with austere environment training. It was something I'd always been interested in but had put aside, first for med school logistics, then for Vanessa who loved city life and hated camping. The application process became a lifeline, updating my CV, reaching out for letters of recommendation, writing the personal statement about why wilderness medicine mattered. All of it reminded me that I had a life and identity beyond that relationship. I was Dr. Marcus Thompson, almost finished with residency, specializing in emergency medicine, with interests and passions that had nothing to do with country clubs or family approval. The work of reclaiming that identity felt revolutionary, like removing layers of performance I'd wrapped myself in to be acceptable to people who'd never actually accept me. I also started therapy, something I'd considered off and on during residency but never prioritized. My therapist, Dr. Williams, was a black woman in her 50s who'd heard variations of my story before. She didn't let me wallow or self-pity, but she also didn't minimize what had happened. "You experienced a particular kind of rejection," she said during our 3rd session. "Not just romantic rejection, but the rejection of your entire background, your family, your path. That cuts deeper because it's not about you as an individual. It's about forces much bigger and older than your relationship." Hearing it named helped somehow, made it feel less personal even though it was deeply personal. Through therapy, I started unpacking the weight I'd been carrying, not just from Vanessa, but from a lifetime of being the first and the only in various spaces. First in my family to go to college, one of few black students in my med school class, often the only black physician in the room during residency. I'd learned early to be twice as good, to make others comfortable with my presence, to navigate predominantly white spaces with a particular kind of emotional labor. With Vanessa's family, I deployed all those survival skills, not recognizing how exhausting it was to constantly perform your right to exist in a space. What would it look like to choose spaces where you don't have to do that work? Dr. Williams asked. It was a revelatory question. I'd spent so much energy proving I belonged in rooms that didn't want me. I'd never considered just leaving those rooms, finding communities, relationships, spaces where my presence wasn't a negotiation but a given. The fellowship application was part of that. Wilderness medicine had a surprisingly diverse community, people from all backgrounds united by passion rather than pedigree. But it went deeper into how I thought about my worth and where I invested my emotional energy. The fellowship acceptance came in month 5 post-breakup. I was at the hospital when the email arrived, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to process the wave of emotion. I'd gotten it, a full year in Colorado working with search and rescue teams, learning high-altitude medicine, technical rope rescue, and backcountry trauma care. It was prestigious in its own way, competitive and challenging, but also completely outside the world Vanessa and her family valued. Standing in that hospital bathroom, staring at the acceptance letter on my phone, I felt something shift. This was mine, built on my terms, and it had nothing to do with her or them. I gave my notice at the residency program, explaining I'd finish my commitment then transition to the fellowship. My co-residents were supportive, excited even. Several admitted they'd been worried about me since the breakup, relieved to see me animated about something again. Dr. Chun was particularly encouraging. You've been a standout resident, Marcus, but I've watched you lose some spark these past months, she said. This sounds like it'll bring it back. She was right. Planning the move, researching Colorado, preparing for a completely different practice environment. It all felt like waking up from a long, suffocating dream. I didn't tell Vanessa about the fellowship. We'd had zero contact since she left, and I intended to keep it that way. But Chicago's professional circles are smaller than you'd think, and apparently word traveled. About 6 months after our breakup, I got a text from her. Heard you're leaving for Colorado. Congratulations on the fellowship. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling nothing. No anger, no longing, just a mild irritation that she'd broken the silence. I didn't respond. Whatever she wanted, closure, connection, absolution, I had none to give. But that text was apparently just the opening salvo. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more messages appeared, each progressively more personal. I've been thinking about us a lot lately. Then, I may have made a mistake. Finally, can we talk? I miss you. Each one I read with increasing detachment, like observing someone else's drama. The desperation was obvious, but what struck me more was the manipulation. No actual apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just vague overtures designed to draw me back into conversation. I blocked her number after the 4th message. Then came the mutual friend interventions. Sarah got to me first, sheepish and uncomfortable. Marcus, I know this is weird, but Vanessa asked me to reach out. She's really struggling, wants to apologize properly. I looked at Sarah, someone I considered a genuine friend, and felt the betrayal of being put in this position. Sarah, I appreciate our friendship, which is why I'm going to be direct. I don't want contact with Vanessa. If she's struggling, she should talk to her therapist or Cameron or her family. I've moved on, and I need people to respect that. Sarah flushed but nodded, and to her credit, she didn't push. But others did. Jake, a law school friend of Vanessa's I'd gotten to know, called with the same mission. Man, she's really torn up about how things ended. Cameron's not working out, and she realizes what she gave up. The framing was infuriating, like I was some backup option she could return to when her first choice didn't pan out. Jake, I'm going to say this once. I don't care. She made her choice very clearly. Whatever she's dealing with now is not my problem or my responsibility. He tried to argue, to paint her as some tragic figure, but I hung up. The audacity of thinking I'd be waiting, available, grateful for her reconsideration. The real escalation came about 8 months post-breakup, a month before my move to Colorado. I was at a coffee shop near the hospital, reviewing patient notes, when someone slid into the chair across from me. Cameron. I recognized him immediately, and my first instinct was to leave, but curiosity kept me seated. Marcus, right? We met at the Christmas party, he said, like we were old friends reconnecting. His ease was infuriating, the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to fight for a place anywhere. I know, I said flatly. What do you want, Cameron? He had the decency to look uncomfortable, his polished exterior showing cracks. This is awkward, but I wanted to talk to you about Vanessa. Man to man. I almost laughed at the absurdity. There's nothing to talk about. You're with her now, right? Congratulations. He shook his head, and I noticed the exhaustion in his face, the signs of stress. It's not what everyone thought it would be. She talks about you constantly, compares everything I do to how you did things. It's like I'm competing with your ghost. And honestly, it's killing what we might have had. I sat back, processing this surreal conversation. Cameron had everything, the background, the approval, the girl, and he was here complaining to me? Why are you telling me this? I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Because she needs closure or reconnection or something. She's miserable, which makes everyone miserable. Her parents are constantly asking what's wrong. Why she's not happy when everything is perfect now. The bitterness in his voice was evident. I thought maybe if you talked to her, told her it's really over, she could move on and we could actually build something real. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The golden boy, the perfect match, reduced to begging her ex to release her from emotional purgatory. Cameron, I'm going to be honest with you. What Vanessa feels or doesn't feel isn't my problem. I've moved on completely. If she's unhappy with you, that's something you two need to figure out. He leaned forward, almost desperate. Just one conversation. Tell her you've moved on, that there's no chance. She needs to hear it definitively to let go. I studied him, this man who'd been a symbol of everything I wasn't good enough to compete with. In person, he just seemed ordinary, tired, frustrated, trapped in his own way. No, I said simply. I don't owe Vanessa closure. She ended things clearly enough that there should be no ambiguity. If she's spinning fantasies about what we were or could be, that's her work to do, not mine. And honestly, Cameron, if you're already here begging her ex for help 8 months in, maybe you should reconsider if this relationship is worth it. His face darkened, pride wounded, but I didn't care. I packed up my things and left him sitting there. The final attempt came from the most surprising source. Patricia, Vanessa's mother. She called my cell phone. God knows how she got the number. 2 weeks before my move. Marcus, dear, it's Patricia Thompson. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. Every word dripped with the false warmth I remembered, the performance of civility over actual respect. I'm calling because I owe you an apology. We were wrong about you, about your relationship with Vanessa. You were good for her in ways we didn't appreciate at the time. I stood in my nearly empty apartment, boxes stacked around me, and felt absolutely no satisfaction from this admission. Mrs. Thompson, why are you calling? I asked, skipping past the pleasantries. She sighed, and for the first time, I heard something genuine. Regret maybe, or just exhaustion. Vanessa is desperately unhappy. Cameron is not what we thought. He lacks your drive, your integrity. He's been coasting on his family name, and now that they're actually together, the differences are stark. We pushed her toward the wrong man, and I'm calling to ask if you might consider giving her another chance. The sheer audacity left me momentarily speechless. They'd spent 2 years making me feel inferior, pressuring Vanessa to leave me, championing Cameron as the superior choice. And now, when their golden boy proved to be fool's gold, they wanted me back? Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You spent our entire relationship making it clear I wasn't good enough for your family. You pushed Cameron despite knowing Vanessa and I were serious. You got exactly what you wanted. She chose him, chose your approval. And now that it's not working out, you think I should just… What? Be available for a do-over. Patricia had the nerve to sound hurt. Marcus, I know we weren't always welcoming, and I'm sorry for that. But you have to understand our position. We wanted what we thought was best for Vanessa. We were wrong. You're a doctor, you're clearly dedicated and successful. We see that now. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive and try again? Vanessa loves you. She's told us so repeatedly. The manipulation was masterful, reframing their classism and prejudice as simple parental concern, casting me as unforgiving if I didn't capitulate. No, I said firmly. I can't and won't. What you're sorry about isn't how you treated me. You're sorry your preferred choice didn't work out. If Cameron had been everything you hoped, you wouldn't be making this call. You'd still think you were right to push Vanessa away from me. I'm not interested in being anyone's backup plan or consolation prize. I've built a life that has nothing to do with Vanessa or your family, and I'm moving to Colorado in 2 weeks to start fresh. I need you to respect that and stop contacting me. There was a long silence. Then Patricia's voice turned cold, the warmth evaporating. I see. Well, I suppose we misjudged you in a different way. I thought you cared about Vanessa, but clearly you're holding a grudge. That seems rather petty for someone in the healing profession. The pivot to offense was predictable, making my boundaries into character flaws. Goodbye, Mrs. Thompson, I said and hung up before she could continue. I blocked her number immediately, then sat among the moving boxes and laughed. A genuine, releasing laugh. The audacity, the sheer entitlement, it was almost impressive. That conversation clarified something important. These people, Vanessa included, operated from a worldview where forgiveness meant allowing yourself to be mistreated repeatedly, where setting boundaries was holding grudges, and protecting yourself was petty. They'd built their entire social structure on the assumption that people like me should be grateful for their conditional acceptance, that we'd always be available when they decided we had value after all. The fact that I'd moved on, built something independent of their approval, was incomprehensible and therefore offensive to them. The move to Colorado happened on schedule, and it felt like shedding a skin. Loading my life into a truck, driving away from Chicago, watching the city disappear in my rearview. Each mile was liberation. The fellowship started intense and stayed that way. Mountain rescue scenarios, high-altitude physiology, wilderness trauma that bore little resemblance to the controlled chaos of an urban ED. I loved every exhausting minute of it. My colleagues were diverse in every sense. Different backgrounds, different paths to medicine, united by passion for austere environment care. No one cared where I went to undergrad or what my parents did for a living. I made friends quickly, people who became genuine community. Sarah, different Sarah, wilderness medicine Sarah, was a former park ranger turned physician assistant with infectious enthusiasm for backcountry work. James was an Army medic finishing his medical degree, with dark humor and unshakable competence. We'd spend 12-hour days training, then gather for dinner and beers, processing the work and our lives with an openness I'd never experienced in Chicago's professional circles. When I mentioned the breakup in passing, Sarah just said, "Her loss, man." And that was it. No prying, no demands for details, just acceptance. The landscape helped too. There's something clarifying about mountains, about the immediate reality of the environment. At 12,000 feet managing a simulated avalanche victim, Chicago drama felt absurd and distant. The work demanded presence. You couldn't afford distraction when someone's life depended on your competence in conditions where backup was hours away. It was medicine stripped to essentials. Knowledge, skill, judgment, compassion. No insurance codes, no hospital politics, no family expectations. Just the patient, the environment, and your ability to navigate both. About 4 months into the fellowship, nearly a year after the breakup, I met Jasmine. She was teaching a wilderness medicine course I'd signed up for, an EMT with a specialty in technical rescue, all of 5'3" and capable of carrying a full pack up terrain that left me gasping. She was black, from Oakland, with a laugh that filled rooms and a directness I found both intimidating and refreshing. We started as friends, grabbing coffee after courses, eventually hiking together on days off. There was no agenda, no pressure, just easy companionship with someone who understood the work and the why behind it. One evening after a particularly brutal training, we'd been practicing helicopter evacuation procedures in a snowstorm. We ended up at her place for soup and warmth. She asked about my path to medicine, and I gave the abbreviated version, including the breakup as context for the move. Jasmine listened without interrupting, then said simply, "That woman was a fool. Her family too. But their loss became Colorado's gain. So I'm grateful for her stupidity." It was matter of fact, no pity or outrage, just assessment. Something in my chest loosened, a tension I'd been carrying without realizing. We started dating slowly, testing whether the friendship could hold romance. With Jasmine, there was no performance, no code switching, no exhausting work of making myself palatable. She'd grown up working class, put herself through school, knew intimately the dynamics I'd faced with Vanessa's family. Our third date, I mentioned my parents, and her immediate response was, "When can I meet them? Union electrician and postal worker? That's solid foundation right there." The contrast to Vanessa's world was so stark it almost made me laugh. This was what ease actually felt like, being valued for exactly who you were, background included. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, the implosion continued. I know because the attempts at contact never fully stopped. Email became the method since I'd blocked numbers. Vanessa sent long messages about regret, about recognizing what she'd lost, about how life with Cameron was empty performance. "You knew me in ways no one else does," one read. "I was myself with you, and I threw that away for appearances. I'm so sorry, Marcus. Can we please talk?" Each email I read with clinical detachment, then archived without responding. They were artifacts of someone else's journey, no longer relevant to mine. Cameron sent his own message, surprisingly vulnerable. "You were right when we talked. This isn't working and I'm ending it, but I wanted you to know. Vanessa never stopped loving you. I was competing with a memory I couldn't match. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for my role in how things went down." Her family's approval seemed important, but it came at a cost I didn't fully understand until I was living it. I almost felt bad for him, another casualty of the Thompsons' manipulations, but ultimately he'd made his choices too. The email from Robert, Vanessa's father, was the most surprising. "Marcus, I'm writing to express regret for how we treated you during your relationship with my daughter. You conducted yourself with dignity and professionalism, and we responded with snobbery. Watching Vanessa's unhappiness, seeing the caliber of man Cameron actually is versus who we imagined, has been humbling. If you're amenable, I'd like to have a conversation." Part of me was curious what that conversation might entail, but the larger part recognized it as irrelevant. Their regret didn't undo the damage or validate my worth. I'd found that validation elsewhere. I drafted one response that I sent to all of them, a group email to close the loop definitively. "I appreciate the various messages, but I need to be clear. I've moved on completely. My life in Colorado is fulfilling personally and professionally in ways that have nothing to do with the past. I wish you all well, but I'm not interested in revisiting or rehashing what happened. Please respect this boundary and don't contact me again." It was professional, firm, and final. Most respected it. Vanessa sent one more email. "I understand, but I'll always love you," which I archived without responding. Then silence. The fellowship year flew by, and as it ended, I faced a choice. Return to Chicago and the job offers waiting, or stay in Colorado where I'd built a life. The decision was easier than I expected. I accepted a position with a rural hospital system that valued wilderness medicine skills, bought a small house with a mountain view, and started building something permanent. Jasmine and I moved in together after dating for 8 months, a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. My parents visited, charmed by both Jasmine and the landscape, proud of what I'd built. One afternoon, Dad and I were sitting on my deck, looking at the mountains, when he said something that stuck. "Son, I was worried after that breakup, not that you couldn't handle it, but that it might make you bitter or small. Instead, you grew. You chose yourself, your path, and built something real. That takes strength most people don't have. Coming from a man who'd faced his own share of discrimination and closed doors, who'd built a stable life through sheer determination, it meant everything. I'd passed some test I hadn't known I was taking. 2 years after the breakup, almost to the day, I got a wedding invitation. Vanessa was marrying someone new. Not Cameron. Someone I didn't recognize from her world. The invitation was surprisingly humble. A simple card without the elaborate affair her family would typically demand. A handwritten note was included. I know this is strange, but I wanted you to know I found my way to something real. Thank you for showing me what that looked like, even if I couldn't appreciate it at the time. I hope you're happy, Marcus. You deserved better than I gave. It was the closest she'd ever come to a genuine apology. I showed it to Jasmine, curious about her take. She read it carefully, then handed it back. You going? I shook my head. No point. That chapter's closed. She nodded. Good. Though it sounds like maybe she finally grew up a little. Took her long enough. We threw the invitation in the recycling and went for a hike, which felt like the appropriate level of acknowledgement. Later, I did send a card. Just a simple congratulations, no return address. A gesture of closure more for myself than her. Whatever she'd learned, whatever she'd become, it was separate from my life now. The story could end there, neat and resolved, but life isn't quite that clean. About 6 months after Vanessa's wedding, I was at a wilderness medicine conference in Denver when I ran into Patricia and Robert Thompson in a hotel lobby. They were there for some philanthropic event, and the recognition was mutual and awkward. For a moment, we all froze. Then Patricia approached. Marcus, what a surprise. You look well. Robert stood behind her, uncomfortable but present. I was polite but distant. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I'm here for a medical conference. Patricia seemed older, less formidable than I remembered. We heard you're doing remarkable work in wilderness medicine. Robert and I have followed your career from a distance. I hope that's not inappropriate. It was strange, this civilized conversation with people who'd once represented everything rejecting me. I appreciate that, I said neutrally, not offering more. Robert cleared his throat. Marcus, I meant what I wrote in that email. We were wrong about you, about what matters in a partner for our daughter. We let outdated values override her happiness and your worth. I'm genuinely sorry for that. The apology, face to face, landed differently than words on a screen. I could see the regret was real, aged into something like wisdom. I appreciate you saying that, I responded carefully. It was a difficult time, but it led me here, to work and a life I love. So in a way, things worked out as they should have. Patricia smiled sadly. Vanessa speaks of you occasionally, always with regret and respect. She's trying to build something healthier with her husband, learning from past mistakes. I think you showed her what genuine partnership looks like, even if she couldn't sustain it then. There was something both validating and melancholic about the conversation. They'd learned, they'd grown, but it didn't change the past or undo the damage. I'm glad she's happy, I said honestly, and I hope you've all found peace with how things unfolded. We chatted for a few more minutes. They asked about my work. I kept answers professional, then parted cordially. Walking away, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, just a kind of neutral closure. They were human, flawed, capable of growth. That didn't make what they'd done right, but it made it understandable. I called Jasmine from the hotel room that night, recounting the surreal encounter. How do you feel about it? She asked, always cutting to what mattered. I thought about it, really sat with the question. Grateful, actually. Grateful I didn't settle for being someone's acceptable choice. Grateful I found my way here, to you, to this work. Their regret validates that I wasn't the problem. But honestly, I'd already figured that out. She laughed. Damn right you weren't the problem. They were, and she was, and now they all get to live with those choices while you live your best life. That's the real ending. She was right. The real story wasn't about Vanessa's regret or her family's belated approval. It was about reclaiming my worth, refusing to audition for acceptance, building a life aligned with my values rather than someone else's expectations. The fellowship, Colorado, Jasmine, the work that challenged and fulfilled me. All of it came from choosing myself when Vanessa wouldn't choose us. That choice, painful as it was in the moment, opened every good thing that followed. Now, I'm 3 years out from that breakup, married to Jasmine as of last month in a simple ceremony on a mountainside with family and close friends. My parents stood with her parents, working-class solidarity and genuine joy, no pretension or performance. I practice medicine I love, teach wilderness skills to other providers, and come home to a partner who values everything I am. The life I have bears no resemblance to the one I'd imagined with Vanessa, and I'm grateful for the divergence every single day. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if she hadn't ended things, if I'd married into that family and spent a lifetime navigating their conditional acceptance. The thought makes me shudder. I'd have been a smaller version of myself, constantly code-switching, always aware of not quite measuring up in their eyes. I'd have missed Colorado, missed Jasmine, missed this whole life that fits like skin rather than costume. Her rejection, painful as it was actually a gift, freedom to find where I actually belonged. The moral, if there is one, isn't about revenge or karma, though there's some satisfaction in knowing they recognized their mistake. It's about the courage to walk away when you're not valued, even when walking away is the hardest thing you've ever done. It's about building your worth from internal measures rather than external validation, especially validation from people who see you as fundamentally less than. It's about trusting that choosing yourself opens space for people and experiences that actually align with who you are. For anyone reading this while facing similar family interference or rejection based on background, class, race, or any other arbitrary measure, you are not the problem. Their limitations are not your deficiencies. Walking away from people who can't see your value isn't giving up. It's making space for people who can. It's terrifying, especially when you love someone caught in their family's dysfunction. But staying in that space will hollow you out until you don't recognize yourself. Choose yourself. Choose your worth. Choose the life that's actually available rather than the one you're trying to force into being. I don't harbor bitterness toward Vanessa anymore. She was caught between genuine feeling and familial expectation, and she made the choice that felt survivable at the time. I hope she's learned and grown. Hope her new marriage is built on stronger foundation. But her journey is separate from mine now, a story I'm no longer part of and don't need to be. My story is here in these mountains with this woman doing this work, living this life. It's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything I didn't know I needed when I was too busy trying to be enough for people who'd never truly accept me. 3 years on, the scar tissue is just that, healed over, part of my history but not defining my present. I rarely think about those Chicago days, about family dinners where I felt like an exhibit or the crushing moment she chose their approval over us. When I do, it's with compassion for my younger self who tried so hard, and gratitude that he finally found the strength to stop trying. That version of me, desperate to prove his worth through endurance and accommodation, taught this version of me what not to accept, what not to settle for, what real partnership actually requires. So to Vanessa, wherever she is in her journey, I hope you found what you were looking for. I hope you learned that ease without authenticity is just comfortable emptiness. I hope your new husband gives you what I couldn't, not because I was inadequate, but because you weren't ready to fight for something real over something approved. And I hope you've made peace with how things ended, because I genuinely have. You gave me the gift of rejection, and from it, I built a life beyond anything I could have imagined in your world. And to her family, the Thompsons and all the families like them who gatekeep belonging based on pedigree and prejudice, your approval was never the prize you thought it was. The people you reject for arbitrary reasons go on to build remarkable lives without you, while you're left managing the consequences of valuing appearance over substance. I don't need your belated recognition or regret. I needed it 3 years ago, and you couldn't provide it. Now I've built my validation elsewhere, and your opinion is irrelevant to my worth. This is where my story actually ends. Not with their regret or her realization, but with my life, full and rich and entirely my own. The woman who said she couldn't choose me over her family made her choice, and in doing so, freed me to make mine. I chose myself, chose growth, chose a life where I'm valued completely rather than conditionally. That choice, every single day, remains the best decision I've ever made. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment of choosing myself when she wouldn't choose us. For that, paradoxically, I'm grateful. Thank you for watching all the way through. There's another story to your left screen. You'll enjoy it more than this one.